Ajax, which stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, is a set of web development techniques and technologies used to create interactive and dynamic web applications. It allows web pages to exchange data with a web server asynchronously without requiring the entire page to be refreshed or reloaded. The asynchronous communication with the server enables web application to update content dynamically, responds to user action without refreshing the entire page, and provides a more seamless and interactive user experience. Hello, welcome to Process Guide. In this video, we'll be looking at Ajax and how we can use Ajax technology to build a simple app without any backend technology. Our traditional web application looks like this, whereby you open a page and you click on a button. When you click on that button, the whole page is refreshed. You are presented with a new site. Ajax brings to the table is the fact that you can update a particular section of a page, and then it gets to trigger another portion of that page without it refreshing the entire thing. That itself is like magic, So having to have a particular page only load when you need it to be. So you can look at the app that you guys use nowadays. If you look at TikTok or Instagram, whereby you just make a comment in a particular place and then it gets updated without loading the entire page. The little section that you're working on is taken into cognizance, and that is what gets updated. So let's get into it, and let's look at how we can use Ajax to build our application. What are the things that we need to worry about? First of all, it requires JavaScript, as the names imply. And the second thing we have to take into consideration is the object that will allow us to do this request, and that is called xmlHttpRequest. We'll go into details as time goes on. And finally, we also need to understand JSON. JSON is JavaScript object notation. That is the object that normally get returned when you run any Ajax request. So look at JSON as a simple object data type that might be a group of arrays or objects. So it's more of like object in an array or array in an object. So in that form. And whatever data we have returned, we can then use DOM manipulation to update our interface to give us what it is we want to look at. So remember that what this is all about is us calling a backend that someone has developed before. But because we have not gotten to the end of designing a backend now, we need to rely on someone's backend that someone has already done. We're going to be using this REST API that is called REST countries. And the idea of this API is that it allows us to query database of countries, and we can do one or two things with the information that we have. So we're going to build an interface, an application that is going to allow us to immediately we select the country, we're going to see the flag of that country by side. So it's just a very simple app. And what we will be needing, we'll be using two APIs. The first API gives us the list of all the countries, which we'll be loading into a select box. And then on change on the select box, it will be giving us the flag. It's pretty straightforward. We'll be using the second endpoint to be checking what flag or what country that we select so that it will give us the name of the flag. And I think the second endpoint or API is this. So I'm going to write out the APIs out. So we have this API called, we are searching by name, and then we are searching the entire country. The first API is to list the entire country in our select box. So first thing we need to do is to first create our files that we need for today's class. What we need to do is that we need to create a request to the server, to the backend, which is the Ajax call when the page loads, so that it will then populate this first page for us to the list of countries that we have. That's the first assignment we need to do. But we have the endpoint that generates the list of country for us. So let's even give it a try. Let's see what we have here. So here is the endpoint that generates the list of countries that is available, and I'm going to call it. When you click on it, it gives you this information. So my browser has the ability to view by JSON data. So you can see the result. This is the raw data, and if you look closely, you will notice that each data is in an array format. So if you convert that to JSON data, it makes it look like this, right? Whereby it giving us all the information that we need from the endpoint or from the URL that was specified, because this is how we are going to consume the data. Somebody somewhere sat down and wrote this code from the backend that when you call this endpoint, it's going to give you this result. So we don't need to go and worry ourselves how this was generated. What we need to worry about is the fact that we can call it using a JavaScript request and then get the result to our end. Let's go ahead and see how we can implement that. We have this somewhere, let's copy it somewhere, and we have our interface built. So this is how our select is going to look like. Let's make this our entry point of our app and say ID and app ID. So this is more like our entry point. This is where the select box will be built in. We already have the structure in our head. I'm going to put this as a comment so that we don't forget this URL. We can then use this URL to do what we want to do. We want to make sure that when this app loads is when the system should call this request for us. It's very important that that is at the point at which we want this request to be called. So, and how do we check when the application loads? We check that on having event handler listening to the window event called load. This is when everything on the DOM is already loaded into the system. So once that happens, the system can go ahead and then execute the function that follows. So this is the function that we want to call once everything has loaded. Once everything has loaded, it can then start making the request to call this information. Now, this is the major part now. How do we then make use of the object to get this value? So I'm going to introduce something new now, and that is xmlHttpRequest. That is the object in which you need to use to get the request that we're about to do. This is new, and this is what you need to do that. So I'm going to use a constant variable, and I'm going to call this request. Our request is equal to the new of this is an object. So we have to use the new notation because it's an object. Create a new instance of this object. And once that is done, we can then make use of our request. To make our request, we call the open method or function. And the open method requires or accepts two arguments. The first argument is a method in which we want to get the data we are trying to get from the backend, which is this. So there are several methods. We have get, we have post, we have patch, we have delete, and we have other ones. But these are the four major ones that you need to focus on. By the way, we're only going to be dealing with get. So you can also use post if you want to send something to the server, because it's possible that you are filling a form and you want to send that information to the server using this method. But in this case, the request is that we are getting information from the server. So we then use the method called get, and we have it that way. So the next thing that follows is the URL or the endpoint that serves as the backend connection to what we are trying to do. And when we put that, we'll copy the one, we already have it copied here, we can then put it here. This information is what opens the connection to the backend. The next thing is, after we've opened it, we need to send the information to the backend. So we'll do request.send. This action sends that information to the backend. And when you have this send, you are halfway done. The next thing for us is to inspect and check when the information has actually returned data to us. And while this is happening, the system keep running other things, because asynchronous means that just do it and let everybody continue doing what they are doing. So if you write a code down the line, that code can literally execute even before this code get to run, because this one is being sent on an errand to do something for you. So nobody waits for any XHTTP request. It just works on its own. It might take time to return, but once it's returned, you should be able to handle the result that it brings back from the server. So because we are testing, I'm going to show you how to handle this result. And the way to handle this result is like so. Request.unload. So there's a function called unload. And what that unload does is to make sure that if the data has been fetched completely, that's when something should happen. So you come here and put your function and write what you need to happen once the function has been loaded. So what I just need to do is I just want to console log to see that our action is actually working. What we've done so far is working. Then we present, the next step of action that we need to do. I want to show you the objects that get returned so that you get to see other interesting parameters that you can make use of. Let's make sure we tie this to this. And if we inspect elements, we should be able to have something like this. Now look at what we are returning. We are returning xmlHttpRequest object. And you can see all the information that we have there. So let's take it step by step. Now the onload function is what happens when everything has been called. The part that I need you to look at is, for now, is the response text. The response text is what holds all the data that we are expecting from the server, which was the same thing as when we typed it in this part here in the address. This was the data being returned, but my system was able to convert it to JSON. This is the raw information. They have an extension that converts this to JSON for me, and it's looking pretty this way. But when you're working on it like this, it returns as a string. It now depends on you to convert it to JSON. So we're going to be doing a little bit of JSON, here now. And this is what we are concerned about, response text. So let's go ahead and convert our response text to JSON so that we can see how the system gets to do that. Now that we're cool about this, we're able to get this part done. The next thing is that we want to convert. So we now have a data that we want to work with, and we want to make sure that the data is the same thing as what the response text is all about. But this response text, I want to convert it to a JSON data. To convert it to JSON data, I need to do, there's a keyword called JSON. Is an object, in JavaScript, and then has a member function that allows you to pass a string inside. Whatever string you pass inside, it will convert it to JSON object. So you can then do this and log your data. Now you should be seeing something very interesting and easy to read. So when you run this again now, you now have something like this. So you can see the result. This result is looking better. And when you click on each of the elements there, you can see your result. Notice the way it's coming out. This is array of objects. And that understanding of the object or understanding of the data that is being returned from the server is very important, because that's how you will know how to consume the data. If you don't understand the data that is coming in, you will know how to consume the data. So this data is coming in form of an array of objects. So the first array is 0, and inside it you have all these member functions or member properties that also, some of them are objects, some of them are arrays. So you need to understand what it is we are looking for. However, for the purpose of this training, we are focusing just only on the name, and this is under the name section here. And this can be gotten from immediately we enter the array, then we drill down to the name. Once we get to the name, we're focusing on the common name. There are quite a lot of things that you can do on there, but we're focusing on the name section. So let's go ahead. Since we're focusing on the name, we now know that to get to our item, we need to be able to do something like this, data, and this will be like kind of index. It's an array, an index. And when we have our index, we will do your name, then we can do common. And this should give us access to our data. Since we know it's an array, we can do a kind of a loop and say our C as a country of data. Then we will be able to build a string. Remember what we are supposed to do here. We are supposed to build a select box information that has option like this, and then we can have our country. I want to build something like this in the form of a string that I can then add to a select box like this. So I want to build something like that up. First of all, I need to have options. My options can be blank by default, so that I can then build that string up by saying option is equal to this, whatever option is already, concatenate it with option and then the value of c dot name dot common. So that should build that up for us. It should build a string for us that has this, but it won't build our select string. We then need to go and build our select string. But we know that we want to add everything into here. We have several options we can run through. We can build the select element like this and say this can be a constant, and then we do create element. What element are we creating? We're creating select element, such that we can then use our select e is equal to insert HTML element, and whatever it is here becomes what is inside here. Remember that this is now the content, so that's what we just set by doing this. The next thing is to allow our ID here to be able to adopt it. So let's create this here at the beginning of everything. So app ID is equal to, and we have that, so that we can then do append child, and our child to append is select e. Immediately we just ran that. Look at what happened. It just built that thing for, it didn't even wait a second. So that just gets built. This one is now useless. The purpose of this was just to build a template so that you guys will see what it should look like, and it's supposed to aid you to know what you're supposed to do here. So let's reduce some fonts. Okay, so we have that selected, and everything is looking nice, except now the system now has ability for us to automatically build list of states. And you can see how easy this is in terms of how much problem this can solve. Within your app, you don't need to worry about a list of states. If this was the only thing you were able to do, it might worth it, right? Imagine someone have to manually type all the name of states, just for you to use this, where you can just immediately implement a backend solution for getting the list of names that you have. And there were advanced stuffs there in which you can actually get a specific field, but the fields that we are focused on is the names. So you can actually have this such that your server don't return something too much. So we're just returning only names here, since that's what we are dealing with. Now the next thing for us to do is to move a step ahead, and that step is for us to be able to display the flag of the country we select. How interesting will it be when you just pick Russia and then you have Russian flag lying there, for us to see. So that's what we want to implement now. What we then need to do is ability for us to know when we click, we need to be able to add an event listener. So when we change the data, when something has happened to this data, we should be able to listen to the event and do something on that regard. How do we track that? We already have the object here. This is the object here, and we can actually add an event listener to the select E. I think select country sounds more better. Select C sounds better. So select country is, then we'll add event listener to it. And what we are concerned of is change. Then we focus on the fact that once we have a change, we want to have this happen. Just to make sure we have our data running, we can do this as planned. So you can see that immediately we change, you can see what is happening. Our event is being triggered. This is what we want to see. Let's go ahead and implement the solution to what we want to get. The solution is that once we click, I want the system to tell us that we just clicked on Japan. Once we click on Mongolian, I want the system to tell us that that is what we clicked, because that name is very important to the next REST API we're going to call. We want to be able to send an API to the server that will pass the name of the country and then give us a result. But first of all, before we do that, we need to be able to know the name of the country that we just selected. So one of the ways to do that is by using some of the parameter available here, and that will require us to know the index of the item that was selected. So because it's select box, it has a different parameter, and you just need to work with me on this. Okay, let's start with this. If you do e.target, and the E is coming from here, by the way, this is the event, that is being captured whenever you change. That is the event capture. So when you do e.target, there is a parameter called selected index. And this selected index is based on the fact that this is an element, a select element. So it has access to what was clicked, and we can actually console log that or select element. So if you change anything here, you can see that it's dumping an 8 to us, and that is because we have that available. The target is the element that we're dealing with, while the selected index is what was checked. So from the fact that we know the selected index, you can actually use it to find the option name. Know that all these items here are called options. So you can actually drill down and know the option. So I'm going to console log something else. And what I'm going to console log this time around is target. So inside the target, I'm going into the options. And the options are all the options in a particular, in everything. If you say options, it's talking about all the options in the target. But by the way, I'm not looking to get all the options. I just want to get one option. And that one option requires you to provide an array because the options return an array. Then how do you get the index of the one that was clicked? You already have that here. So you can pass all this information inside here. So I will turn this to a variable and say let I is equal to whatever it is that we've gotten here, so that we can then pass our I inside here. So if you run this again, you should be able to see we're missing something. Let me check what that is. Line 24. Okay, so we're missing typo. So let's run that again. If you do this, so you should be able to get this. Oh man. So you can see the name tallies with what we select here. This is the option. And you can get the content of what you have here. You know that this is an element itself. Option is an element. Select is an element. So therefore, what you are returning is an element here. To then get the inner text, you can either do inner HTML or inner text. So if you do inner text, you have this result. You have this Sao Tome Principe. You can do this and you get this. You have this answer. So this gives you access to the element that was selected. So you then say selected, you can do this, selected option is equal to this value. So this value becomes my selected option. This my selected option, I can even call it country. So that becomes the country that is selected. Now, why do we need to get the country? Because of our next API. Let's go to the API platform and see one of the requirements to call the second API. This is the second API here. And what we want to do in the second API is that we want to be able to get the details of each of the country by name. And hence, we are running this one. Yeah, this is it here. I want to use this one. Let's use this one here. This request calls the endpoint, but it requires a parameter, and that parameter is by name. So if you do this, let's run it locally and see if it works. So if you go here and put a country, let's say London. London is a country. Let's say Nigeria, and then we have this information. So it gives us all the information we know about Nigeria. So if you pass another country here, you're going to see that result. So you need to be able to pass that country that we've selected into this endpoint, which is what we want to do now. Remember how we wrote this endpoint. So the same thing we did here to call this endpoint is the same thing we're going to do again. So the same method we have here, we're going to run this method all over again. So I'm going to copy this one, have it copied now, and then here I can just change the name. Instead of calling it request, I can say C request, which is country request. I can make this capital letter for easy readability, and I can have this renamed, but remember that we're changing the endpoint. The endpoint is now changing to this new endpoint. It's changing to this new endpoint, and I can go and do this. But mind you, the name is supposed to be the new name that we want to provide here. So we make this go away and we introduce a plus sign so that we can concatenate it with this country over here. Now that we have that in place, the next thing we need to do is that we need to know what we want to get out of what we are doing. Let's see what is returning. We already know what is returning from our sample data. We already saw what we are returning. But this is the focus, this is the catch. We are gaming for the flag. The flag is what we're looking for, and the flag is located here. Immediately after the array, notice that it's also an array, but it's an array of one element. So we don't need to do a loop or anything. We just pick the first item, and then we go and look for flag. Yeah, this is it. So this is it here, flags. And then we can pick the kind of flag we want. We'll actually pick an SVG. So, but let's go ahead, since we know what to do now. So in order for us to see the data, you have to do the same thing we did before and attached our code to unload is equal to what is it we want to do. Create a curly function with no name. We do this. Then you can then write the code of what should happen when you have our data. Remember, your data is here, is inside response text. This is where our data is. The same thing, you need to convert that data. You need to convert that data to JSON data. So you can run this once now. Then you pass this information. You convert this to JSON data. That has been done. The next thing you want to do is that we want to make an image come here. I can just put one here by default and give it a name. I will call it flag. The ID is flag. So that I can just come and be changing the flag based on what is currently available. Then I call this my flag and I can rename this to flag. So this is available for me to use in my app now. So that I can then do my flag src is equal to data. Remember that is an array that has one item, but then we are looking for the flags that has svg. Then we need to specify the width, because if we do not put the width here, we will not see anything in our results. But I can add that to a css handler here. I can let this do that for me. Okay, so let's give it a try and see if everything is working. So if I do this, well, it's working. So our flag is working, but I want this to stay on top. So there are some changes that I need to make happen. I want this to be on top and not under. So I can make my flag come underneath what I'm appending here, so that whenever I request for my information, my flag will always come down. Another thing I want you guys to notice is to show you how slow the whole thing is. There's a pause in between when the flag is actually responding to what I told it to change to. And that's because when I make a change event, the system is actually going to a third party to request for that information. It's very important that you know what is going on when you make HTTP requests. So notice what is happening here, and I'm going to come to fetch or xhr. So that's what happens when you're making such requests. So if I click here and I pick Mali, for example, see what gets run. It took 818 milliseconds to get to the server to return this bit of information to me. Very important, guys, very important. So this is what happens. You can see my data coming in as an array, having an object, having a property that is also an object that have all this information. So this information is what is happening whenever you click on, whenever you change that. You can see the next one is being run and it gives you this information. This is serious business. Okay, let's go ahead and add some dynamism to this in such a way that once you click, it gives you that loading effect and it doesn't just stay frozen. So it gives a user the kind of feedback so that they get to know that, well, something is happening, because it's possible that you are making a request that stays longer. So even though this request is shorter, there might be some requests that might be longer than usual. So you want to tell the user, let the user know that something is happening. So what I want to do right now is to kind of create a loading effect that will tell the user that this thing is loading. So we need to go and look for image for loading so that we can use that to trigger kind of a loading effect. So we have that saved as loading, and I will come and put loading here so that we can have that information right there. I can even have something like this where I can style the information. So let's use setIndex to bring that guy up so that when we change this, it will always be on top. So let me change I don't like the loading guy. It's not looking well on my black. Okay, I think the snail is doing it for me for now. So let's see how we can program this in such a way that our snail goes away. By default, it's looking like this. Then we need to hide it by default. Display is equal to none. We need to bring it to light when we need it to work. But to understand what is going on, there's something I need to explain to you guys, and that is the state of what is happening at the point where we are requesting something from the backend using Ajax technology. We need to understand what is happening at that point and how to implement such states, or how to know how to implement the states of what's going on. Let's go on and continue the state change to explain the state of what happens next. And that is called onReady state change. So you need to watch this section, because what this section does is to tell you what is happening at every point in time, every life cycle of your request. There are several stages, I think like 5 of them, but the one that the system will capture will be like 3, and then you get to see the stage. Let me print it out so that you get to see all the stage that is currently happening. So I'm going to console log all the states, and to know the state is when you come here and then you say ready state. Ready state is just telling you that, at this point, this is what I'm doing. At this point, this is what I'm doing. So I'm going to the console, and then once you change this, it's printing 3 different states for you. State 2, state 3, state 4. The state that we are very important with is the last state, which is stage 4. Stage 4 is when everything is done. So at the point when it is stage 2 and stage 3, we are not bothered. At that point is when we should say it should be loading. So at the point when it's stage 4, we're going to remove the loading effect on this. So the loading effect should always be triggered immediately you change the state. The loading effect should be triggered immediately you change the state. So let me create our loading handler here so that we can always, manipulate it when we need it. So this is what we use to for loading, so that at any point that you come and click change effect, what should happen? It should automatically make the style of the display property block or inline. Let's make it inline. And what that means is that it will allow you to see the loading effect immediately. The point where it should stop showing you this loading effect is at the point where our request here is equal to 4, because 4 means we are done. So we come here and then we say if it's equal to 4, we need to put our conditional statement, which I'm missing right now. Then I'll go to if this, I get this. If it's equal to 4, what should happen? This is when it should say that we are done. And instead of making it inline, we'll make it none. That way, it removes it from what we are doing. So let's give it a try and let's see if it's working the way we want it to. So Laos gave this and then it shows. We go to Russia, it gives that and it shows. So at every point, we are seeing that loading effect. Immediately we are done, it just takes them away and prepare our result for us. So we can see like a few seconds lap, but I think it's still usable like this. I want to have a coat of arm also sit on the bottom right here. So we need to check where we're going to append our coat of arm to. Looking at what we have here, so we're going to create another coat of arm here so that we have, so instead of us calling it coat of arm, I'm going to do orders. And the idea of these orders is so that we can have other elements attached to this section, so that we can then do our orders here. So this is more like our order elements. That's what these orders should be all about, so that we can then add our coat of arm to orders. But before I add it, I make sure that I clear whatever is in orders. So I need to clear it off by doing this. Then let's go ahead and set our coat of arm value to be, for src, to be what we have here. So I need to look at the URL where that is obtainable. We have a section called coat of arms and svg. So we have it at data 0, we have this.svg. Then don't forget the width. So let's make sure that we have it in a place that is going to show and nothing is going to disturb it. Okay, we can see our item at the below is below that. So I need to work on it. I need to work on it to move below that item. So we need to make sure that number one, our item is well structured. First of all, the width needs to be properly, not worried about the width. The position should, everything should start from the right. Z index, yeah, it should be higher than everything there. So okay, now it's showing. Okay, I think this is good. The next thing we want to do is I saw something that talks about the population, so we can actually go ahead and also implement population, and that population can be in a kind of a container border right. So let's go ahead and implement population, and for population I'm creating an element, but this time around I want it to be, let's do that after here. Let's do that here. But it's gonna be, let me make it a paragraph. Let me make it a div. I don't know what the population is in terms of the value of population, what we're going to use, but I'm going to go check the API. I saw something very interesting. Oh, okay, I've seen the population. So I could just do this, and I want to style it. Okay, so we can have this like this, and then we are good to go. So that gives you the general idea of what you can use API to do and how it can actually, make your design, different, give you a different perspective of what design is look like. So your assignment is for you to guys to go and also implement something different using the same API that I've used, but in this case, try and reach out to other components of the API and display it on the screen, just as I have done, and see how you can present this. You can have a better UI, to what I've done. So, for example, instead of numbers like this, you can have the currency that the country use. So let's even use, if you want to use currency, you know what to do. You check the API and then you see the currency that the country spends. So you have 98,000 people in this country. So let me see my country, Nigeria. So yeah, that's 200 million. You have 200 million people. So this is a nice one, guys. So let's see what you guys can come up, with.
Thank you for staying to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and turn on bell notification in order to be notified when we release new videos. See you in the next one.